Quaalude has been one of the more popular street downer drugs over the past 20 years. It was introduced in the United States in 1965, again, as a safe, effective, non-dependency producing drug to replace barbiturates. It was the most frequently prescribed sedative hypnotic. The drug was quite popular on the street. It was touted as an aphrodisiac. This effect primarily occurred as a result of the initial sedation caused by the drug, which would then lessen inhibitions by sedation of that portion of the brain that controlled reasoning. With inhibitions lessened, people found they were more inclined towards sexual acting out than normal. People found that unlike alcohol or other sedative drugs, the ability to perform sexually was not lost. In spite of the belief of their safety, methaqualone has numerous side effects, including loss of motor coordination, dizziness, and severe hangovers. Tolerance and both physical and psychological dependence occur. Overdose is common and occasionally fatal. Without medical supervision, withdrawal is often deadly. Hello and welcome back to Learning Together, a series we're doing here on the Recovery Couch. I'm your host, Brandon Couch, and today we're diving into more drugs of abuse. Last time we talked about alcohol and what it does to the body. Today we're going to jump into other depressants and what are known as all-arounders. So these drugs are typically sedative hypnotics. Sedative hypnotic drugs are substances that induce depression on the central nervous system because these drugs tend to create a calming effect. They relax muscles and relieve feelings of tension, stress, anxiety, and irritability. They are commonly referred to as sedatives. And at higher doses, or if the compound has greater potency, sedatives also produce drowsiness and eventually a state resembling that of natural sleep. Drugs that have a sleep-inducing effect are called hypnotics. Often these drugs are referred to as tranquilizers, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety drugs, or simply just sedatives. The sedative hypnotic category of drugs is the single largest category of drugs that we will discuss throughout this series. These drugs are synthetic compounds prescribed for use under medical supervision. These drugs also have the shortest history of all the drugs in this text, with the exception of potassium bromide, which was marketed in the 1860s as a treatment for epileptic seizures. The entire history of this category spans less than 100 years. That's the potassium bromide. So first we're going to talk about barbiturates. Second, we'll talk about minor tranquilizers. And then we'll also talk about other sedative hypnotics. For each category, we'll look at the specific drugs, their history, and the physical effects. So first we'll talk about barbiturates. And there's a brief introduction about barbiturates. They are central nervous system depressants. They are used to treat anxiety, induce sleep, and control seizures. These drugs can cause intoxication similar to intoxication that's caused by alcohol. And an overdose of barbiturates can cause death by respiratory failure or by seizure. Crazy enough, I have had barbiturate-induced seizures or benzodiazepine-induced seizures. Barbiturates can create both physical and psychological dependence. Withdrawal from barbiturates can be dangerous and even fatal, as I just discussed about what happened in my life. Combining barbiturates with other depressants can cause a synergistic effect that can produce death. Barbiturates are the single largest category of drugs. There are over 2,500 compounds in this category, of which only about 50 derivatives of barbituric acid are marketed for medicinal use, with fewer than 15 in common use today. The first barbiturate was synthesized in 1862 by Dr. A.H. Bayer of the Bayer Company in Germany. You've probably heard of Bayer through Bayer aspirin. The name barbiturate probably comes from the fact that Dr. Bayer was a great fan of the German military. He undoubtedly used soldiers as volunteers to obtain urine specimens to isolate the uric acid. St. Barbara is the patron saint of the military, so he apparently named his discovery after Barbara's urates, thus the name barbiturate. In 1903, these barbiturates, I always said barbiturate, were first used in medical practice under the name of barbitol. The next 50 years, a variety of barbiturates were discovered and used in medical practice. They were primarily described to calm nervous individuals, reduce anxiety, or with larger doses, induce sleep. Barbiturates can be broken into three smaller categories. There's ultra-short-acting barbiturates with rapid onset of effects that are used on surgical anesthetics. These drugs produce anesthesia within 1 minute of intravenous administration. Second is short intermediate acting barbiturates used mostly as calming and sleep agents, and they have an onset of effect from 15 to 40 minutes after oral administration. The third are long acting barbiturates. They have an onset time of up to 1 hour after use, but their duration of effects is up to 16 hours. Their slow onset generally discourages abuse. So drugs of abuse typically are going to have a quicker onset. So they affect the body quicker than drugs that the scientists who were trying to control drugs of abuse would have a slower onset, which is why today there's prescriptions that you can get that have a release, a timing release. Those drugs are harder to abuse. Physical effects of barbiturates are similar to alcohol intoxication with a reduction of tension and anxiety, relaxation, slower reaction time, and loss of motor coordination. In addition, these drugs have a high addiction potential as well as a high dependence potential. If physical dependence occurs, withdrawal symptoms occur if the drug is abruptly stopped. Barbiturates have a high physical dependence, a high ability for withdrawal symptoms if the drug is abruptly stopped. Withdrawals from these drugs produce anxiety, tremors, nightmares, insomnia, vomiting, and seizures. So these would be potential side effects, like when you see a prescription medication commercial on your TV and they say side effects could include vomiting, nausea, diarrhea. These are some of the potential side effects that come with barbiturates: anxiety, tremors, nightmares, insomnia, vomiting, seizures. Medical detoxification is often necessary with dependence on barbiturates since the results are often life-threatening. There's a high overdose potential with barbiturates. Since the early 1970s, barbiturates have steadily been replaced by the use of safer benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines that are less toxic. They do not depress the respiratory centers of the brain, and they do not produce sleep as often. There continues to be a large illicit market for the drugs. However, and overdose deaths continue to be quite high. So that's the first category, barbiturates. The second is minor tranquilizers. So some brief introduction. Minor tranquilizers are depressant drugs used to treat anxiety and insomnia. More prescriptions are written annually for tranquilizers than all other prescription drugs combined. Low doses of tranquilizers make their user feel calm. They relax the user and make the user drowsy. High doses of tranquilizers can cause loss of coordination and stupor. Tranquilizers can cause both physical and psychological dependence. Tranquilizers are legal when prescribed by a physician. However, they have a high illicit resale value on the street. Minor tranquilizers represent the single most popular group of prescribed drugs known today. The term minor tranquilizer, however, is quite misleading. There is nothing minor about the effects of problems that come associated with these compounds. And when compared to the drugs known as major tranquilizers, such as Thorazine, Malaril, and the like, there is a marked difference in effect. Major tranquilizers are often known as antipsychotic drugs because they relieve symptoms of a psychotic nature, such as schizophrenia and paranoia. Minor tranquilizers function more like sedative hypnotics and are used in treating anxiety and neurotic conditions. A better term for these compounds would be anti-anxiety agents. The first of these was the drug meprobamate, first marketed in the mid-1950s under the names of Miltown and Equinol. The success of the drug was related to the fact that it worked to be effectively reducing reduce anxiety without causing sedation. It was also less toxic than barbiturates. With excessive use, however, both physical and psychological dependence developed. Its success, however, opened the door for newer, more potent compounds. And in 1960, a new drug was introduced as a more potent, better drug than meprobamate. The drug was Librium, or chlorodiazepoxide. 3 years later, the first cousin to Librium was introduced, diazepam, also known as Valium, and it was chemically similar but 5 to 10 times more potent. Since being introduced, Valium has been one of the most popular drugs prescribed by physicians, being consistently in the top 15 drugs sold worldwide. The third we're going to introduce is the other sedative hypnotics. The euphoriant effect of depressant drugs continues to make them popular on the streets. Because of the problems with the drug, halcyon chloral hydrate is again becoming a popular sleep medication. Quaalude's popularity has not gone away in spite of the fact that it is no longer legally manufactured. It is estimated that 3% of high school seniors have tried. So Quaaludes and chloral hydrate were also minor tranquilizers. This category of other sedative hypnotics is a catch-all category of sedative and hypnotic agents that are non-barbiturate or non-benzodiazepines. It includes some of the oldest drugs in the entire category and also one of the more interesting drugs of abuse. Each drug will be described below. Paraldehyde is one of the oldest known sedative hypnotics. It was discovered in 1829, though not put to use until 1882. It is a compound similar to acetaldehyde, a breakdown product in the detoxification of alcohol. It's a fast-acting hypnotic, inducing sleep in about 15 to 20 minutes. However, it quickly produces tolerance and physical dependence. It also tends to decompose when stored. The resulting product, when consumed, creates a very complex and difficult to manage state of intoxication. Paraldehyde has an unpleasant taste and leaves the user with a disagreeable breath odor. Ugh. Has little clinical use today, though was a popular drug for detoxing alcohol in the 40s and 50s. Chloral hydrate is a liquid marketed in syrups and soft red gelatin capsules. It induces sleep within 30 minutes of use. The sleep generally lasts about 5 hours. At one time, the drug was notorious as the Mickey Finn drug when mixed with alcohol. A sleep effect occurs more rapidly and for a longer period of time. In the late 1800s, the drug and alcohol combination was used to Shanghai potential crewmen for sailing excursions to Hawaii in the Far East. Chlorohydrate drops would be slipped into someone's drink. They would quickly fall asleep and would awaken many miles at sea. Sounds like similar to what we know as the date rape drug, roofies. Chlorohydrate continues to be prescribed today for sleep. It is especially popular with older populations and is widely used in nursing home facilities. Ethchlorvanol, or Placidil, was introduced in the mid-1950s as a safe, non-addicting alternative to barbiturates. It creates sleep rapidly, but in spite of the claims, it quickly creates tolerance and physical dependence. Side effects include dizziness, blurred vision, facial numbness, and mild euphoria commonly occur. Also, the drug is quite lethal when combined with alcohol. Thymide, or Doradin, Dorm tabs, was introduced in 1954, again as a safe alternative to barbiturates. In fact, its dependence potentially is as great, and the drug has other more dangerous effects. High doses of the drug, especially once tolerance has developed, often result in seizures and even coma. That's not good. When an overdose level is taken, the drug is often fatal. Methaqualone, or Quaalude, has been one of the more popular street downer drugs over the past 20 years. It was originally synthesized in 1951 and used in India for treatment of malaria. It is a fast-acting sedative drug that eventually induces sleep. It was introduced in the United States in 1965, again, as a safe, effective, non-dependency-producing drug to replace barbiturates. By the late 1970s, it was the most frequently prescribed sedative hypnotic. Because of its alleged safety and widespread availability, the drug was quite popular on the street. Known as Ludes, Soapers, Lemons, and 714s, it was touted as an aphrodisiac. This effect primarily occurred as a result of the initial sedation caused by the drug, which would then lessen inhibitions by sedation of that portion of the brain that controlled reasoning. With inhibitions lessened, people found they were more inclined towards sexual acting out than normal. As the drug effects leveled out before continuing towards sleep, people found that unlike alcohol or other sedative drugs, the ability to perform sexually was not lost. In spite of the belief of their safety, methaqualone has numerous side effects, including loss of motor coordination, dizziness, and severe hangovers. Tolerance and both physical and psychological dependence occur. Overdose is common and occasionally fatal, especially when combined with alcohol. Without medical supervision, withdrawal is often deadly. Due to the reputation and problems associated with the drug, the Lemon Company stopped production of the drug for use in the United States in 1983 after the federal government severely limited its medical use. It is still manufactured in the form of an antihistamine, however, and sold in other countries, including Mexico and Canada, under the name Mandrax. As a result, the drug continues to be available on the street and continues to be quite popular. Zolpidem, brand names Ambien, Ambien CR, Intermezzo, Stilnox, Sublinox, Hypnogen, Zonadin, Sanval, Zolsana, and Zolfresh, is a prescription medication used for the treatment of insomnia and some brain disorders. It is a short-acting non-benzodiazepine hypnotic that works quickly, usually within 15 minutes, and has a short half-life of 2 to 3 hours. In January of 2013, the Food and Drug Administration announced it's requiring the manufacturer of Ambien and Zolpidem to cut the recommended dosage for women in half. So we're going to cover that today. Stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to get into narcotic drugs, which are also drugs of abuse. I really appreciate you learning with us here at the Recovery Couch. I feel like it's important to understand more about the substances that we're putting in our body, especially if you're like me and you became addicted to prescription medication. Just taking a deeper dive into what these prescriptions are, when they were introduced as a drug, why they were introduced, what they were introduced for, and what they're doing to us anatomically and neurobiologically. So thank you for tuning in for this episode of Learning Together here on the Recovery Couch. And remember that you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch. This episode is sponsored by Greg Swartz at Remax Victory and Affiliates. Whether you're buying your first home, selling, or making a move, Greg brings integrity, expertise, and heart to every step of the journey. He's not just a realtor, he's a trusted guide who puts your needs first. Call Greg today at 937-477-8975 and let him help you find your next home. And don't forget to tell him the Recovery Couch sent you.